Hi everyone, so today we'll be talking about two things. We'll be learning JavaScript object notation, JSON, and we are also going to be learning error handling in JavaScript. So we've worked with JSON before. I think when we install our npm application, we generate a file called password.json, and this is a JSON script. This is how it looks. This is the format of JSON. So now let's go ahead and learn what JSON is. JSON is like a JavaScript object, but it is a string. It is the format that most websites use to pass their data without refreshing the page. It is also very useful for applications to pass data between their different servers and other browsers. Think of an application where you want to share your data with other applications. For example, you have created an application where you get the weather reports, and you want to share those weather reports with other news websites, top news websites, to be able to use the data you have gotten. A good way to pass those data is send those data out to the news websites as JSON in JSON format. So it is useful to pass data between different servers or browsers. Let's go ahead and work with JSON in our program. So let's create a new file in our Node Basics folder. Let's go back to our Node Basics folder and create a new file. Name that new file example JSON.js. So now what we are going to do in this is we are going to create a new object. Let's name the new object person, and we declare person to be an object with a property of name. Name is David, for example, and we have a property age as well, and let age be 12. So if we go ahead and save this, we have our object. Now let's toggle between the JavaScript object and let's see what differences we have from our package.json. You can see that it's like an object, but name is wrapped in double quotation, as well as the property itself. So the property name is wrapped in double quotation as well as the property. We can see here that we just had our name written out here without a double quotation. Now what you want to do to convert this your JavaScript object to a JavaScript object notation string is you just have to use, there's a JSON object in JavaScript, you can just call that. So let's declare a variable person. Let's attach JSON to it, and let's declare that into. Now I said we have a JSON object in JavaScript, so you just have to call that object JSON dot. It has a property called stringify, where you can use this stringify function. You can use it to convert an object to JSON string. So you just JSON.stringify, then you put the object in there. So person. So now if we go ahead to print out, let's console.log person JSON. Let's go ahead and run our example JSON.js. Now we can see that it prints out our JSON to the screen, and what you can notice here is that name becomes wrapped in double quotation as well as age. Let's go ahead and first print person. Let's print this. Let's add this to it. So let's attach a string to it and append the JSON. So let's say this is JSON and then let's go ahead and still print out person, the person object itself, so we can look at the difference. So let's copy that, paste it, then just change this to person object. Let's just say object, and since the name of our object is person, so we can just have a look at the difference. So we can see, okay, person, okay, we can't access the object in itself. Okay, so what happened was that we were trying to append a string to an object, which is not going to work. So what we just have to console.log over here is the person object in itself, and when we run this, what we can see here is we can see our object. Our object is just name David, age 12, and you can see there's no double quotation. But in our JSON, you can see, because it's a string, we have double quotation, and we have David, and we have age is 12, which is also a string. So JSON is a string, while object is a different type of data. So let's go ahead and try to convert from a string back to, from a JavaScript, from a JSON string back to a JavaScript object. Now let's delete this. Let's delete all of this. Let's comment this out. Now this is our variable person. Now we can, let's go ahead and declare a string. Let's declare a string. So inside our string, we want to have an object, or our string will take the JSON format, and let's say name is, let's say, person JSON. So name is David, then let's add a comma and say age. We have to wrap that also in. So age is 12. So what we have just written here is we have written a JSON string. What we have written here is a JSON string. And to confirm that, what we can do is, let's just console.log type of person JSON. Now if we go ahead and run this, we can see that what we have is a string. Now what we can do is to convert this to person. So let's convert this to an object. So let's say variable object person object, and to convert now a JSON string, we use JSON.stringify to convert an object to a JSON string. What we would do if we are to convert JSON to an object is we are going to use still the same JSON object and the JSON object, and we access something called the pass. So it converts a JSON string to an object, and let's go ahead and pass person JSON into it. So person JSON. Now if you go ahead and console.log person object to the screen, and we save that and we run back our code, what we can see is, rather than it printing out the JSON string as we had here, it printed out the object because we've converted it to object using the JSON.pass. So you can write your object, and you can convert it to a JSON string, and you can also write your JSON string and convert it to an object. So let's take, for example, an application sends you JSON string. You would need to convert it to an object so you can access the data inside of the JSON string that has been passed to you. So those are the things we are going to learn in JSON, and we are going to move now to something called error handling in JavaScript. So let's go ahead and just create a new file from here, and inside our node basics as well, and let's save this file as error-handling.js. So now there is something we've been saying. For example, let's create a function, and let's do something like this: variable my number is equal to, and let's declare my number into a string. Let's name that string, let's just say a string. Now what we can have now is, let's just try to say console.log my number plus 2. Let's go ahead and clear this so we can see what we're doing clearly. So what we are going to have here is, let's run this node error handling.js. Okay, because let's do something like this, because we appended this as just a string, and we appended this assuming it's a string. So let's do something like this rather. Let's say var plus 2 is equal to my number plus 2. Then let's console.log plus 2. Now if we go ahead and run this, we still get. So let's just switch the examples. So now what we are going to do is, we are going to try to say, let's switch this to my array, and my array, we are declaring my array as a string. So what we are going to have here, let's go ahead and clear all of this. What we are going to have here is, let's say my array dot for each. So my array dot for each, then element is, let's say console dot log yes inside of this. So for each element of the array, go ahead and print out an element to the screen. Now if we run this, you can see we have an error. Now the error is that type error. We see my array.forEach is not a function. So what we are trying to get since is just trying to get an error, and this does not look good actually. So it's one of the things you should do when programming is to handle your error properly, because for example, if this happens when your application is live and maybe your user passes a data that is not supposed to be passed, what would happen is it displays an error that might actually break your application. So you have to plan for your errors, and planning for your errors is called error handling in JavaScript. Now what we can do is this. Let's go ahead and create a function. Let's go ahead and create a function. So our function, let's use a function. Let's say add account. Let's use add account as we have always used. So let's use add account, and add account receives, let's say it receives an object. Add account receives an object. Account receives an account object. So what we want to do in here is we just want to say account dot push account dot we just want to say account dot push account in here, and we only want to do this when account exists. So let's go ahead and call add account. Let's go ahead and call add account, and let's pass a name object, a name property of this object. So name is David. Name is David. So let's go ahead and do this. Now if we go ahead and run this, we still get an error now. So account is not defined. So now, rather than having this, let's just do something called error handling. So what we are going to do is we are going to wrap this inside a new statement. First of all, let's understand how this whole thing is. Now, to handle errors, you are going to use something called throw. So you throw new error, and when you throw new error, you put the error message over here. So error message, for example, is account array does not exist. Now, this is how you throw errors in JavaScript. So rather than having all of this, you can just throw a new error for when a condition is maybe not met. So what you can now do here in our add account function is that, since you know that there is a possibility that accounts might not exist, what you can just do is use an if statement. So if accounts, let's say type of accounts is equal to a string undefined, that's if it's not defined yet, then what we want to do is we want to throw a new error. So throw new error. Want to throw a new error here, and the error is account does not exist, or let's say account is not yet defined. Then also we can now say else. If type of account exists, then what we can just do is we push this. So now, if we call what we are going to now learn now, let's go ahead and delete this. So this is how you throw new errors. So in events where you expect that there is possibility of an error, then you just have to throw a new error in those events. Now what you can also have is you have to use another thing called the try catch to catch an error. So you try something. When you try it, if there is an error, you catch the error. So E is used to denote error, so log error to console, and you do something. So what we want to try now is we want to try to add accounts. So let's go ahead and try to add an account. Now if we go ahead and save this, if we catch an error, let's just go ahead and let's print this out first. So let's run node error handling.js. You see that in as much as we ran this add account and we are supposed to get an error, we did not get an error. Let's just say let's do this. Let's copy this and put this here and still see. So in as much as we still try to push accounts here, because we have thrown an error, it did not run. So what we are doing here is we are trying this and we are catching the error. So if we go ahead and now console.log the error, console.log e, you can see now that we have our error print out to the screen, which is account is not yet defined. And the account is not yet defined is because we added a message to our error, the error that we are throwing. So what we can now have now is we can now console.log we can now console.log the error.message. So if we go ahead and run this, we can see that account is not yet defined because we've thrown an error in the when the account is undefined, and then we try to push it. Now another thing we can now do is we can just go ahead and use something called finally. So finally, then we can say var accounts is equal to an empty array. So when you try catch, then you can also use a finally to just say what happens next. Or let's just go ahead and console.log finally. So if we go ahead and do this, account is not yet defined, then finally it just prints out console.log finally. So this is very, very important because sometimes you are supposed to receive an object from a user, and you are receiving a string, and what your function actually needs might be an object. So it is important that you define all these things. You just throw a new error for when the right condition to be used is not met. Then you just try to catch those errors so that you don't just have errors display like this to the screen. So this is just a basic try catch. We are going to be using it, and you should be using it almost every time in your software development journey because it is good to use. It is very, very good to use. You'll see the use as you develop more often. So thank you.